Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Hungarian political parties. So today's episode was requested by Ben Sarnacy, Base Nat, Slayer, JGHREHGHEW. Sorry, I don't 100% know how to pronounce that. And Ivan on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, you can either comment them down below, send me an email, send me a message on Patreon for my patrons, shout out to Andy Merrow and Juan Pablo Bascar, by the way, or send me a request through my feedback and request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Thai parties, Latvian parties, Icelandic parties, Estonian parties, Swedish parties, Palestinian parties, Belarusian parties, Norwegian parties, Georgian parties, Finnish parties, and many more. So let's briefly discuss Hungary's party history after World War II. Hungary was initially a democracy in the late 40s before being toppled by the communists, at first under the Hungarian Working People's Party, and then the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party, after the 1956 revolution. After the fall of communism in 1990, Hungary became a multi-party democracy. However, Hungary was largely dominated by two blocs in the 90s, the Reformed Communists/Social Democrats and their liberal allies, headed by the Hungarian Socialist Party, or MSZP, and a right-wing conservative bloc, headed by the Hungarian Democratic Forum, until it was supplanted by Fidesz in 1998. Hungarian coalitions typically saw whoever headed the coalition kind of de facto lord over it, with his coalition partners pushed more towards the sidelines. The 2000s were a race between Fidesz and the MSZP until the 2010 election, when Fidesz won in a landslide victory. Since then, Fidesz has governed the country, and no opposition party has really been able to challenge them, often due to being divided, ideologically and personality-wise. Hungary has since the 2010s been sliding towards an illiberal democracy, with controversial constitutional reform in 2012, the government increasingly consolidating its power, and Hungary aligning itself with non-liberal democracies, which I'll talk about later. I think important to know going into the episode is Hungary is currently viewed as a little bit of a rogue in the EU, breaking with liberal norms, and the Hungarian political party system frequently sees large parties that often are aligned with smaller parties in very one-sided and domineering relationships. Hungary is also preparing for an upcoming election in April of next year. The April election, unlike those of previous elections, actually seems like the opposition has a chance of winning. While previous elections had seen the opposition divided, or like in 2022, in an uncomfortable and fractious coalition, this time the opposition is largely united around a single party, the Tisza party, which we will get to towards the end of the episode. It doesn't seem guaranteed that the opposition is going to win, but this upcoming election will likely be the closest election in over a decade, and will at the very least change the composition of Hungary's legislature. The main legislative body of Hungary is the National Assembly, which is what will be voted on next year. The National Assembly is made up of 199 MPs who are elected via two ways. 106 MPs are elected from 106 constituencies found throughout the country via first past the post. The remaining 93 are elected via proportional representation, with a party needing 5% of the vote to pass the threshold, unless they are a party representing a national minority, like Germans, Roma, or Slovaks, in which case they only need 0.27% of the vote. Also important to note, if two parties run jointly together, they need 10% of the vote, while three or more parties will need 15% of the vote to pass the threshold. And minority parties that fail to pass the threshold can appoint a non-voting minority advocate. The notable thing about the proportional seats is they are divided up similar to Japan's electoral system in the House of Representatives, where the proportional seats do not take into account the constituency seats. So if one party wins 30% of the PR vote, but every single constituency, they are still going to win 30% of the PR seats, which will mean their proportional share in the legislature is most likely going to be significantly higher than 30%. This makes it easier for the largest party to get a majority in the National Assembly, and is less likely to rely upon other parties. The National Assembly will vote on rules and regulations, elect the Prime Minister, the most powerful political figure in the country, along with their cabinet, and elect the President and members of the Constitutional Court. Hungary is also a member of the EU, sending 21 members to EU Parliament. So let's get to the juggernaut of Hungarian politics. Fidesz, Hungarian Civic Alliance, or Fidesz Magyar Polgári Szövetség. Fidesz was originally formed as the Alliance of Young Democrats, which is where the Fidesz name/acronym comes from. in 1988 at the fall of communism. It originally was a center-right liberal party, although in the mid-90s, many of the more liberal elements broke off and it began moving towards conservatism. It has had a presence in the Hungarian legislature since 1990, and under party leader Viktor Orbán, won the 1998 election, leading a coalition with other right-wing parties. It lost the 2002 election, but due to massive scandals in the MSZP, managed to win the 2010 election in a landslide victory, and has dominated the country since, never falling below 40% of the vote. In the 2010s, it began to make the change from a conservative party in the vein of many other mainstream center-right parties throughout Europe to a more hardline, communalist, populist, nationalist, and hostile towards the EU party. Where it falls exactly ideologically will vary, with its opponents saying they are fascist, far-right, and/or ultranationalist, while supporters would probably label them as communalist, or national conservative, or just simply conservative, or actually, as we'll talk about a bit later, centrist. Its support base is generally seen as more rural, more devoutly Christian, generally older, more likely to be working class, middle class, or unemployed, and without a university degree. It also gets dictator margins when looking at the diaspora vote, with a large amount of support from Hungarians living in Romania. It tends to get support from those sympathetic towards Orbán and his vision of a communalist conservative Hungary, those angry with previous MSZP governments of the 2000s, those hostile towards the EU and wanting to protect Hungarian identity, and generally those who feel like life in Hungary since the 2010s has been good to even just fine. It currently has 116 MPs and sends 10 members to EU Parliament, who sit in the Patriots for Europe group. It's currently headed by Orbán, who has been the prime minister since Fidesz took power in 2010. The president of the country, Tamás Sajok, while not officially a member, was elected with Fidesz support. Fidesz likes to portray itself as ideologically the middle ground between the left-wing/liberal opposition and the anti-establishment nationalist, presenting itself as protecting Hungarian sovereignty and backing socially conservative ideals. It is opposed to sex education in schools, is strongly hostile towards communism and its legacy in Hungary, opposed to LGBTQ characters being presented in media, attempted to ban pride parades last year, generally opposes increased immigration, and wants to keep Hungary Hungarian, opposing multiculturalism. It is often described as economically interventionist, with its supporting tax breaks to couples with children, supporting natalist policies, and sought to create more public works jobs, although it also has at the same time promoted the privatization of state land, sought to loosen labor laws, and reduce corporate taxes. In terms of foreign policy, it has generally aligned itself with states skeptical or hostile towards the EU, including Russia, Turkey, China, and Trump's America, while also being strongly supportive of Israel, opposing weapon shipments to Ukraine, being vocally confrontational with the EU, although not wanting to necessarily leave the Union, and supportive of establishing ties with Hungarian minorities in neighboring countries. A good way to summarize Fidesz's policies actually comes from Fidesz's website, with one article saying, quote, "Only the Fidesz government can protect Hungary from the war in Ukraine, illegal migration, and gender ideology, and the opposition would join ranks and hand over our country to Brussels." While Fidesz has for many years been the most popular party, the fact of the matter is it is polarizing, and many segments of Hungarian society and the international community despise the party. It is accused of undermining democratic norms by consolidating control around the government, removing the separation of powers, gerrymandering seats, and rewriting the constitution unilaterally, of being corrupt, and allowing its political allies free rein over the country's economy and many senior members of the party becoming extremely rich, calling any who oppose the party anti-Hungarian, tying the party and the current government itself to the Hungarian identity, willing to spread lies or just fear around its opponents, and being friendly with other anti-democratic politicians throughout the world, and especially recently being accused of being a lapdog for Russia and/or Trump. It has frequently been the pariah of the EU, with the EU establishment frequently condemning Hungary under Orbán, and with some even calling for Hungary to leave the Union. While supporters of Orbán view him as standing up for Hungary and its sovereignty, many of the opposition view this as isolating Hungary from the rest of the Union and weakening it diplomatically. Its more nationalist and social conservative policies are also very controversial, being viewed by its liberal and left-wing opponents as racist, xenophobic, and/or homophobic, willing to stir up fear to gain electoral votes. Its position towards Jews is very ironic. It on one hand has several high-ranking politicians who have vocally backed historic anti-Semitic nationalists and being accused of downplaying the Holocaust in Hungary, while at the same time being very sympathetic towards the state of Israel, and Orbán being a close friend to Benjamin Netanyahu. This has led the liberal opposition to label the party anti-Semitic, while at the same time the nationalist opposition has claimed the party is under the control of Zionists. All this makes the party widely disliked among certain segments of Hungarian society. But this all being said, many of the critiques towards Fidesz and Orbán can come from kind of outside the country and fail to gain too much traction among the wider population. Instead, the bigger pushback against Orbán in recent years has come from several corruption scandals in the party, including a high-ranking party official who helped cover up a child sex scandal being pardoned, weak public service, and rising inflation and cost of living over the years. While Orbán is the top dog in the party, if Orbán ever goes away, it could pose an existential question for the party, since Orbán has historically played a very important role in helping shape Fidesz, leading it since its inception. While Fidesz probably isn't going to go away anytime soon, and is likely to get at least 35 to 40% of the country to back them no matter what, this upcoming election in April will pose a serious challenge to the party and if it will continue to govern. While Fidesz de facto runs the country, it is technically in a coalition government, with its junior coalition partner being the Christian Democratic People's Party, or Kristinn Demokrata Népárt, or KDNP. The KDNP is one of the oldest parties still operating in the country, being formed in 1944 as a successor to the older Catholic conservative parties that operated in interwar Hungary. It served as a Christian democratic and right-wing opposition to the growing communist bloc until in 1949 when the communists fully took over the country and the party was forced into exile. With the fall of communism, it returned and began contesting elections again, serving as a Christian democratic and socially conservative force. It was in government in the early 90s, but by 1998 had lost all of its parliamentary representation. In the lead-up to the 2006 election, it joined forces with Fidesz, and since then has contested every election jointly together. The party likes to present itself as a necessary moral compass to the Fidesz government, with Fidesz serving as the mass party with the support of the people, while the KDNP serves as intellectual and moral guides to Fidesz and its politicians, aiming to promote Christian values, oppose abortion and gay marriage, and close shops on Sundays. However, many opponents of Fidesz in the party say the party is largely just a satellite of Fidesz, helping Fidesz argue Hungary under its rule isn't a completely one-party state. If the KDNP ran separately from Fidesz, it's unclear how much support the party would get, but I imagine it'd probably be somewhere in the range from as high as 6% to maybe as low as less than 8%. And I'm guessing a lower estimate probably would be more likely, just kind of based off the fact it hasn't run in a while, and the last election it contested by itself, it really did not do very well. The KDNP currently has 19 MPs and sends one member to EU Parliament, who sits in the Patriots for Europe group. It is currently headed by Zsolt Semjén, AMP and Deputy Prime Minister. The last pro-government party is also a minority party, the National Self-Government of Germans in Hungary, or, and I'm going to warn you, this is going to be brutal, Landesverwaltung der Unterdeutschten, or LDU. Side note, all minority parties in Hungary have a similar naming scheme with National Self-Government of X minority, or something like that. The LDU was formed in 1994 and aims to represent the German minority in the country, wanting to protect language rights for the German language and promoting cooperation between Hungary and the German-speaking world. It first contested elections in 2014, and in 2018 was able to pass the electoral threshold, getting a MP elected who now votes with the government and claims to also represent all minority groups in the country. It's not a super important party in the country's politics, but it does provide support to Fidesz and influence the country and government in a minor way. It is currently headed by Ibola Hoch Englander, a teacher. So we have finally finished with the government and their allies, and we will now move on to the opposition. I first want to go over the parties that had formerly made up the United for Hungary coalition that competed in 2022. The largest party in the X coalition, and quite frankly, the only party that might win seats in April, is the Democratic Coalition, or Demokratikus Koalicio, or DK. DK was formed as a breakoff of the MSZP in 2011, largely headed by and dominated by Ferenc Gyurcsány, the Prime Minister of the country from 2004 to 2009. I'll talk more about the MSZP in a minute, but for understanding the formation of DK, it's important to note that after the 2010 election, a fraction of the MSZP blamed Gyurcsány for the failure of the party, blaming a turn to the center, corruption, and an infamous speech in 2016 that, again, I will get to later. DK emerged representing a socially liberal and progressive wing of the MSZP. it played an important role in the liberal opposition to Orban being the most voted for opposition party in the 2019 EU elections, and played an important role in setting up the United for Hungary coalition. Its support base is similar to that of much of the liberal/left-wing opposition, being largely younger, based in Budapest or other urban areas, more likely to have a college degree, and often tends to be more well-off. It has generally been the party for both pro-EU center-left Hungarians, but also as a kind of catch-all party for those who dislike Orban and believe he is too corrupt/authoritarian. It currently has 16 MPs, and sends 2 members to EU Parliament, who sit in the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. It is currently headed by Klára Dobrev, a member of EU Parliament, and ex-wife of Gyurcsány. DK is in many ways the opposite of Fidesz, socially liberal and pro-EU. It is supportive of a welfare state backing greater maternity and child support, wants to set up a free utility minimum, wants to increase the length of unemployment benefits, backs union rights, wants higher pensions, wants to increase wages to those working in the public sector, and wants to set up a European minimum wage. It socially backs LGBTQ rights, wants to make it easier for all couples to adopt a child, and is pro-choice, although they also support some more conservative policies like wanting to reduce the number of immigrants coming into the country. It is very pro-EU, supporting a federalized Europe, while also being supportive of NATO and pro-Ukrainian. It also wants all school children to learn at least one European foreign language by the time they graduate, wants to move funding and school choice away from the national government and to local municipalities, wants to reduce the amount of state funds going towards church operations, wants a new constitution, wants to fight against corruption, and wants to do more to crack down on pedophilia. DK has historically been the largest opposition party, but like most of the ex-United for Hungary parties, it has in recent years lost much of its support base. Broadly across the liberal opposition, they tend to be viewed as largely elitist groups, dominated by well-off urban snobs that are propped up by outside actors. Depending on who is making this accusation, this could either be just out-of-touch activists outside the country, to the opposition is 100% controlled by George Soros and EU bureaucrats. The opposition in particular suffered in 2022 with confusing messaging and a muddied political ideology, with the United for Hungary coalition including Democratic Socialist and ex-neo-Nazis all together under one bloc. DK and the MSZP, because they are descended from the former Communist Party, do get accused by the conservatives of being full of crypto-communist. Ultimately, DK tends to get signaled out due to it being the party of Gyurcsány. Gyurcsány is, like Orban, a very polarizing figure, accused of corruption, which can make the opposition critique of Fidesz corruption appear somewhat hollow. Gyurcsány also infamously delivered the Oswald speech, which was delivered and leaked to the general public in 2006. The speech, based on my understanding, was intended to be an internal MSZP speech that called for renewal in the party. However, the heavy use of profanity throughout the speech, along with Gyurcsány admitting that the MSZP basically was bad at governing and lied to the public, led to massive protests in the country and a significant backlash. This is tainted the legacy of Gyurcsány, the MSZP, and the DK by extension. While the DK had for years been led by Gyurcsány, earlier this year, Gyurcsány stepped down and Gyurcsány and Dobrev divorced. This seems to be an attempt to separate the party from the negative association with Gyurcsány, but it looks like the DK will, if it remains in the National Assembly, serve at best as a junior partner to the new, larger opposition bloc that I'll talk about soon. I've mentioned them at several points, so let's talk a little bit more about the Hungarian Socialist Party, or Magyar Socialista Párt, or MSZP. MSZP was formed in 1989 as a reformed breakoff of the ruling communist. The 1990 election was a poor showing for the party, coming in 4th place, but in subsequent elections it managed to make huge gains and govern the country from 1994 to 1998, and then again from 2002 to 2010, with the Liberal Alliance of Free Democrats serving as a loyal ally. Internally, it seems it was divided between those who wanted a more Western social democratic party that was socially liberal, wanted a strong social market economy while also backing third-way economics that were in vogue at the time and supporting the West broadly, and then others wanting a more post-communist Eastern European social democratic party that was socially quietist to conservative, protected welfare schemes set up by the old communist, and being pro-Russian. This infighting, poor governance, and Gyurcsány's speech led the party to lose the 2010 election, going from 49% of the vote to just 15% of the vote. It in just about every election since 2010 has seen continued losses, and despite teaming up with the DK and other opposition parties, it has really struggled to bounce back. It does seem unlikely this upcoming election it will win any seats, although it likely will continue on in some form after the election. It currently has 10 MPs. It is currently headed by Imre Coyote, a MP. We'll continue on with the Momentum movement. Momentum was formed in 2015, initially as a civic group until it formed a political party in 2017. It came to prominence protesting Budapest's attempted bid to host the 2024 Summer Olympics, with the party able to get several 100,000 signatures opposing the bid. It ideologically was liberal and centrist, generally supporting progressive social policies and backing the EU. It failed to win any seats in the 2018 election, but did do fairly well in the 2019 EU elections, coming in third and beating the well-established MSZP. It ran with the United for Hungary coalition, but afterwards saw leadership changes, and subsequent elections in 2024 saw poor showings for the party, which led it to announce it will not contest the 2026 election. A faction of the party that does want to contest the election did break away, forming the Hungarian Humanist Party, which quite frankly will likely mean Momentum has probably lost all of its momentum. I know, I am probably the wittiest YouTuber/podcaster you've ever heard. It currently has 9 MPs, is currently headed by András Rosa, a Budapest district mayor. We now go to one of the most infamous parties in the United for Hungary coalition, the Movement for a Better Hungary, or Jobbik. Jobbik was initially formed in 2003 to serve as a political vehicle for young nationalists. It quickly began to see gains, presenting itself as a radical ultranationalist alternative to the Hungarian political establishment. It helped form the Hungarian Guard, a quasi-paramilitary organization that was designed to police Roma communities and frequently engaged in protests against the government and/or left-wing organizations. Jobbik also claimed Hungary was under Zionist subjugation, was friendly with Russian separatists in the Donbass in the 2010s, and seemingly promoted a Turnist identity, calling for friendly relations with Turkey and helping deny the Armenian genocide. It reached its best result in 2014 with a little over 20% of the vote, and in 2018, while it did see a minor drop in support, it did emerge as the largest opposition party. However, in 2016, the party started trying to rebrand itself from a radical nationalist party to a respectable conservative party. This was disastrous for the party. It alienated a large chunk of its support base who backed the party for its radical message, while at the same time the liberal/left-wing opposition was largely skeptical of the change, since many of the party leadership who had openly endorsed far-right politics were now presenting themselves as completely reformed. The EU elections in 2024 saw the party win less than 8% of the vote, and it's likely the party will go to the sidelines of Hungarian politics. It currently has 7 MPs. It is currently headed by Andorian Bela, a local councillor from Szatmár-Beleg County. Also in the coalition were 2 Green parties, LMP, Hungary's Green Party, and Dialogue, the Greens Party. LMP was formed in 2009 as a Green Liberal Party able to achieve a loyal support base of roughly 5 to 6% of the electorate. A part of the party always wanted to work with the MSZP to form a grand coalition against Fidesz. In 2013, this faction of the party broke away, forming Dialogue, which was a little bit of a more left-wing version of the LMP, and has contested every election with the MSZP since, which somewhat questions the independence of the party or how much support the party actually has. The mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony, is a member of the party, which does suggest at the very least the party does have some influence in oppositional politics. Both Dialogue and the LMP worked inside the United for Hungary coalition, with Dialogue gaining 6 MPs, while the LMP gained 5. The LMP, partially as a result of the failure of the United for Hungary coalition, started to moderate and endorse the Fidesz-backed candidate for the 2014 Budapest mayoral election, which saw defections from the party. The remaining parties in the coalition are quite small, so let's speed through them. There is the Everybody's Hungry People's Party, the party for the coalition's prime ministerial candidate. It seems this party may work with the main opposition party for the upcoming election, so it may, unlike the rest of the parties I mentioned, actually have a future. There is the Spark Movement, a democratic socialist party that leans into anti-establishment and localist messages that actually managed to win a MP last election. There is the New World People's Party, formed by an ex-Fidesz minister, the Hungarian Liberal Party, based around an ex-minister in the MSZP-led governments, and the Down with 75% of Taxes Party, which is a libertarian anti-tax party. So those were all the parties within the United for Hungary coalition. However, not all opposition parties took part in the coalition in 2022, with the most notable being the Our Homeland Movement, or Mi Hazák Mozgalom, or MHM. It was formed in 2018 as a breakoff of Jobbik, representing Jobbik members who were upset with moderation in the party. It quickly filled in Jobbik's ideological niche of anti-establishment Hungarian nationalist. Its support base tends to be more rural, younger, and seemingly with more support in southern Hungary. It's the party for those Hungarians who feel the Fidesz party has moderated too much or isn't going far enough, as a kind of right-wing catch-all protest against the government, and or among the Hungarian far right. It currently has 6 MPs and sends 1 member to EU Parliament, who sits in the Europe of Sovereign Nations group. It is currently headed by Laszlo Czordaskai, AMP, and former mayor of Ashatolom. The party does like to present itself like many right-wing populist parties as neither right or left, but it could probably be best described as socially and internationally nationalist and economically interventionist. It's strongly hostile towards LGBTQ rights and calls for the banning of pride parades, supports law and order policies, even calling for setting up work camps for prisoners, calls for the complete removal of all guest workers from Hungary and immigration being dropped down to zero, calls for a patriotic education that will prevent children from succumbing to propaganda and brainwashing, wants to segregate Roma and Hungarian students, and calls for an end to all social programs for the Roma, and calls for an end to censorship online. It backs land reform to promote small-scale farming, it supports autoturkey and reducing the need for foreign products, wants to lower the VAT tax while also increasing taxes for billionaires, is seemingly sympathetic towards workfare welfare policies, and wants to invest more in the tourism sector. It is strongly hostile towards the EU, wanting a referendum on leaving the EU, wants Hungary, Poland, and other Central/Eastern European states to form a intermarium alliance, is hostile towards Israel, wants to ensure Hungarian minorities in other states are protected and have self-determination, and wants to acknowledge Hungary is a part of a northern civilization that goes from Ireland to Japan. It also backs greater use of referendums, wants to reduce political corruption by ending any sort of immunity, and supports military conscription. MHM has been able to carve out a dedicated ideological niche for those who feel Fidesz isn't going far enough, but this also makes it difficult for it to grow. Fidesz is leading one of the most right-wing governments in Europe, which makes it difficult to argue to anyone but die-hard rightist that there needs to be a party that outflanks them to the right. It also faces the same danger Jobbik experienced. If it moderates or tones down its message, large segments of the party will likely abandon it, while any groups it attempts to moderate to will likely still view them as racist and xenophobic. Since it is so nationalist, I can see any government that includes MHM may lead to diplomatic incidents with neighboring countries, since those with a large Hungarian minority may fear the party may agitate among ethnic Hungarians living in them. Opinion polls right now show the party hovering just around the electoral threshold, so we'll have to see if it can make it into the National Assembly, where it potentially might hold the key to power between Fidesz and the main opposition party. Speaking of the main opposition party, let's talk about them, since I've been teasing them pretty much the whole episode. The Respect and Freedom Party, or Tisza Socialist, was formed in 2020. It largely flew under the radar for the first several years until early 2024, when Peter Magyar joined. Magyar, a former member of Fidesz, came to national prominence after fiercely criticizing his ex-wife, the Minister of Justice, and the President, for pardoning someone who was in a child sex scandal. He led several different anti-government protests and joined the Tisza party, using it as a political vehicle to get his allies into office. It did fairly well in EU elections, getting almost 30% of the vote, and opinion polls right now show it neck and neck with Fidesz. Magyar and the party seem to be generally conservative, but it's also embracing a somewhat catch-all anti-establishment message. Magyar has sought to appeal to both rural Hungarians and those in the diaspora, traditional Fidesz supporters, but Tisza generally gets the most support in urban areas. The party is overall for any hostile towards Fidesz, and many liberal and left-wing voters will likely tactically vote for it. But also, it's kind of the party for those who just recently left Fidesz over failures in this government. It currently sends 7 members to EU Parliament who sit in the European People's Party group. Magyar is the party's leader and a member of EU Parliament. Tisza generally seems to present itself as a center-right anti-corruption party. Its policies are actually quite similar to Fidesz, arguing that Hungary should avoid taking in too many immigrants, and criticizing the number of guest workers that came in during Fidesz's rule, and supports increasing funding for many of the social services relating to family and childbirth that Fidesz helped set up. It favors increasing pensions for the poorest Hungarians, wants more support towards small businesses, and supports more funding to the education and healthcare sector. It wants to do more to fight against corruption, setting term limits for politicians, wants to make the president directly elected by the people, and seemingly is opposed to the banning of pride parades. One of the areas that it is most strikingly opposed to Fidesz is in regards to foreign policy, with it wanting further integration with the EU, backing the introduction of the euro, and wanting Hungary to join the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Tisza is the most popular opposition party in years, but it's unclear if it will actually be able to beat Fidesz. The government tries to paint Tisza as puppets for EU bureaucrats, are just like all other opposition parties, largely made up of elitist urban snobs, and Magyar himself has been accused of being abusive towards his ex-wife by pro-government outlets, which the Hungarian opposition argue is a smear. While most opposition voters are sympathetic towards them, there is some skepticism. Since Magyar was formerly from Fidesz and worked in the party for many years, and his party policy is somewhat vague, only slightly tweaking Fidesz policy or just loose on details, some see him as a wolf in sheep's clothing, a part of the exact same political establishment he criticizes, and would fail to actually change Hungary. If Tisza comes to power, I would imagine they would suffer a lot with some of the same pitfalls Civic Platform in Poland had to deal with since taking power, being forced to actually pick sides in political disputes, which will alienate portions of their voter base, and struggle to make real, impactful change in a short time frame. This all being said, Tisza is, after this election, going to be an important player in Hungarian politics, for at the very least the next couple of years. It's just a question of whether it will be important in government, or it will be important in leading the opposition. So those are all the parties with a seat in the National Assembly or in the EU, but let's take a second and look at some of the smaller parties. None of these parties are expected to win a seat in April, but some do have some influence at the local level. Perhaps the most famous is the Hungarian Two-Tailed Dog Party, or MKKP. MKKP is a joke party, often putting on grand performances criticizing the government or satirizing Hungarian politics. For example, filling in potholes with art, parodying anti-immigrant billboards by letting people know immigrants wouldn't take Hungarian jobs since Hungarians work in London, campaigning in chicken costumes, and holding a illiberal pride march. They actually do surprisingly well considering it's a joke party, getting almost 4% of the vote in EU elections last year. And they do also have some local councillors. Other small parties include the Second Reform Era Party, a breakoff of Jobbik, the Solutions Movement, an opposition party that has been accused of being a secret spoiler party that is controlled by Fidesz, the Hungarian Social Democratic Party, the oldest party still active in the country, being formed in 1890, and formerly had some minor influence over the country's politics at the national level, the Hungarian Workers' Party, a radical breakoff of the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party in the 90s that represented hardline communist apologists, and the Hue Exit Party, that seems to be a Jobbik breakoff, arguing Hungary should leave the EU. So those are the parties of Hungary. In conclusion, the elections coming up in April are largely going to be a race between Fidesz, representing the conservative Eurosceptic establishment, and the Tisza party, representing a catch-all pro-EU opposition to the status quo. Other parties do exist, like the pro-Fidesz conservative KDNP, the center-left DK, and the ultra-nationalist MHM. But at this point, the main parties are Fidesz and Tisza. April is going to be interesting. It's not really clear who's going to win. I'm suspecting at this point it's probably going to be a one-party government, either Fidesz or Tisza. There's a possibility Tisza may need to rely on the DK if it enters into the national legislature, or Fidesz may rely on MHM, but if Fidesz has to rely on MHM, it's going to be really controversial. I think a government with MHM may accelerate a trend we are slowly starting to emerge, where the right-wing populists/nationalists within the EU all go from backing each other to slowly starting to turn on one another. The big problem with nationalist unity right now is there does come a point where their goals are going to start to diverge. And in the case of the Hungarian nationalists who want to see Hungarian minorities in other countries given autonomy, self-determination, or possibly just be reabsorbed into Hungary, this is going to anger nationalists in Romania and Slovakia, who see these Hungarians as subversive and the lands that they occupy as important parts of their nations. I think some of this happened in the aftermath of the 2024 EU elections, where certain nationalist parties were trying to form an EU bloc, but they would refuse other parties from being allowed in. So I think the MHM said that one Hungarian nationalist party, SOS, wouldn't be allowed to join any EU parliament group that they were in because they would try to block it. And then we also saw this with the AFD, where Members of the French and Czech hard right said we don't want to be associated with them anymore because senior AfD members were defending the Waffen-SS. It gets to a point where you can only go so far in trying to reinstall national pride that it stops just making the libs mad and actually starts angering other nationalist parties. Another kind of random thought till the end, one interesting thing about Orban is in the past year or so, he has done a lot of podcasts with conservative figures, mainly in America, all in English. Generally, the vibe of the podcast is the podcasters will say how great Orban in Hungary is, but it is actually interesting seeing some of the pushback Orban makes on some of the podcasters' claims. So one interview with PragerU has the woman interviewing him at the start saying, "Oh wow, Hungary, it's so beautiful and everyone's very happy and the economy seems so good. You know, you're doing just such a great job." And Orban is actually like, "No, actually the economy is really bad and like the country's really struggling right now." This is something that's always interesting. It's whenever someone likes a politician, they'll say, "Oh, the place that they're governing is so nice," and then when they don't like a politician, they'll say, "Oh, the place they're governing is just terrible. It's awful." The pushback Orban gives is never really evolved into like a back and forth, but they are kind of interesting to catch. Another one is they'll ask about immigration in America or Western Europe, and Orban in actually 2 different interviews says that immigration there and to Hungary is different because these Western countries in America went and they colonized like all over the world, while Hungary didn't really colonize anyone, seemingly implying that maybe immigration into those countries is okay or more understandable, which is kind of baffling that the interviewers don't question that at all or they don't kind of ask them to expound on that. Because that's one of the main reasons they like Orban. One of the reasons why a lot of the American conservatives and hard right, why they like Orban is because they think that he has like ended immigration into Hungary. That's not really true. I mean, Fidesz has brought in a lot of guest workers. That's one of the reasons why Tisza and the MHM have grown in strength because they don't like this immigration. But yeah, Orban is supposed to show how like the right can stop immigration. But he actually didn't do that, and he's suggesting that maybe the West kind of can't stop it because of the fact of their colonial past, because of the fact that they colonized and interfered all over the world. But long rant over, or long rambly section over. Anyways, the next one I'm going to do is Thai political parties. I don't know how long that's going to take. I mean, my guess is that's probably going to come out either late December or maybe mid-January, depending on how much research I have to do. Again, there was someone who was saying that they may be able to help me out. If you were that person, please send me an email. Email is whydocountriesexist@gmail.com. I'd love to get in touch to learn a little bit more about Thai political parties. After that, I will do the history of Djibouti, and then I will do Latvian political parties. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.